Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Det Arguego, Managing Director of Assessment Analytics, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Beyond Emotional Intelligence, Building Better Workplace Behavior. This webinar is part of our complimentary webinar series in celebration of AAI's 20th anniversary. It's our way of giving back by sharing practical ideas, fresh perspectives, and conversations that we hope will help individuals and organizations continue to grow. Now, before we officially begin, may I ask everyone to kindly turn on your cameras for a quick group photo? I'd also like to let everyone know that today's session is being recorded. We'll also be sharing highlights on our YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn pages. Ray will be posting the links in the chat, so please feel free to connect with us there. Now, today's topic explores something that I think many leaders, managers, and HR professionals have experienced firsthand. We've spent years talking about emotional intelligence, and rightly so. It's an essential leadership capability. It helps us become more self-aware, more empathetic, better communicators, and better equipped to build relationships. But here's an important question. If emotional intelligence is so important, why do we still see unhealthy workplace behaviors, recurring conflicts, inconsistent accountability, and communication breakdowns even among capable and well-intentioned people? Perhaps the answer isn't just about individuals. Perhaps it's also about the systems they work within. Because even emotionally intelligent people can struggle when expectations are unclear, feedback is inconsistent, accountability isn't reinforced, or organizational processes unintentionally reward the wrong behaviors. Now, today's session invites us to look beyond individual capability and examine the workplace systems that shape behavior every single day. And I think that's what makes today's discussion especially timely and relevant. To guide us through this important conversation, we are honored to have with us someone whose work sits at that intersection of leadership development and organizational systems. Our speaker, Ms. Sunny Ray Fragante, is the founder and principal consultant of IlluminHR and is a leadership and people systems architect. She partners with organizations to strengthen leadership effectiveness by improving the systems that leaders operate within. Over the past 14 years, Sunny has worked across leadership development, organizational development, talent management, coaching, and learning design. She has helped organizations build stronger leadership pipelines, improve performance systems, develop succession strategies, and shape healthier workplace cultures. She has worked across a wide range of industries: aviation, finance, technology, healthcare, logistics, manufacturing, and professional services, among others. She is a certified learning and development professional, a certified points of view explorer, and a certified AQ and grit practitioner. Before establishing Illumin HR, Sunny held leadership and organizational development roles and has also served as a university lecturer in various social sciences. One of the things I personally appreciate about Sunny's work is her perspective that leadership doesn't happen in isolation. The behaviors we see in organizations are often shaped not just by people, but by the systems around them. I'm looking forward to learning from her today, and I'm sure all of you are as well. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Miss Sunny Ray Fragante. Sunny, thank you once again for being with us today. The virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very warm introduction. Let me welcome everyone to this session today, and I shall share my screen so that everybody can see what I will be talking about today. Right? Okay, all right. So before we begin today's session, we're going to be talking about why emotional intelligence is not enough, right? All right, so emotional intelligence. today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, but from a very different perspective, right? We see emotional intelligence as a very, should I say, very personal perspective. We often look at emotional intelligence in a way that is a very individualistic idea, where we think that emotional intelligence is something that only an individual can develop, right? Because for emotional intelligence, when you have emotional intelligence, when you exercise emotional intelligence, you learn to understand yourself, you learn to regulate your own emotions, and you learn to empathize with other people. It is also a springboard for you to manage your relationships with others, right? And so we put a lot of pressure on emotional intelligence, and that becomes a problem. Why is that a problem? Well, uh, emotional intelligence becomes a problem because we ask people to be emotionally intelligent in systems that often reward the opposite. We put too much pressure on emotional intelligence in people, whereas most people in organizations, even if they're high functioning, even if they're high performing, they are still vulnerable to, um, shall we say, emotional intelligence challenges, right? They are put in situations where their own emotions are put under stress, because we expect people to speak up, to give feedback, to be held accountable for what they're doing, to show empathy, and to act with integrity. But in many instances, our organizations do not actually support the behavior where emotional intelligence is, let's say, safe to practice, or is really given the room to grow. Because in many systems, we we don't we say, okay, speak up, but don't make waves. We say, give feedback, but let's avoid conflict. We say everybody needs to be accountable for everything that they do, but then we don't also identify roles, or we don't give them clearer roles and decision, uh, their decision rights, right? We ask them to show empathy, whether to their customers or to their internal clients. But the roles or the workload that they are given does not give them enough breathing room or enough space to actually demonstrate that empathy, because they are overwhelmed by the workload. We ask them to uh, show up, to be consistent, to act with integrity, to do the right thing. But they may be in a system where the consequences of bad behavior are inconsistent. They may see instances where bad behavior is excused or rewarded. And so their structural integrity, their leadership integrity, is then um, subject to pressure, right? So this is what we mean by when we um, but when we say that you need to be emotionally intelligent, but you also need to be surrounded by systems that work to help you become more emotionally intelligent. So, how does better behavior most often break down in an organization? I'd like you to, take a look at this list here, right? These choices. And if you could, in the chat room, just give your answer, right? Where do you think better behavior most often breaks down in your organization? Is it with unclear expectations, or because conversations are avoided, tough conversations are avoided? Or do you suffer from poor escalation or inconsistent accountability? Or are your managers overloaded by work? Where do you think this breaks down? Okay, feel free to put in your answer. Okay, wow. Right. It's all of the above for the most part, right? Okay. There's some D's and C's and E's. Okay. All right. So thank you for your responses, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. You are right. It is
better behavior does happen. Better behavior does not happen when all these three or all these five actually, as I was saying, emotional intelligence is personal. As I mentioned this at the very beginning, emotional intelligence is personal because you regulate your own feelings. You are more self-aware. You allow yourself to become more self-aware. You allow yourself to identify the emotions that you're feeling at the moment, and you allow yourself to regulate your own emotions, right? So it is a personal thing. However, how you respond to that is no longer just personal. Behavior is systemic. Why do we say that? You respond to stimulus external to you. You respond to situations, to structures, to processes, to the way things are moving around you. So if you work within a system, your behavior is largely influenced by that system, right? So better workplace behavior actually depends on you having both emotional intelligence and a system where your emotional intelligence is actually not, put under constant stress, right? So when you think about it, your ability to regulate yourself, your individual capability to be a better leader, to be a better employee, plus the workplace conditions that you're surrounded by, then that allows you to work better, to behave better, to behave according to the values and the standards that you are expected to perform at. Okay. So when we talk about structural integrity, we actually talk about the workplace systems that you work in that support the behaviors that it claims to value, right? So what are the things that you need to ask and take a look at when you want to check, are my systems structurally sound? Number one, ask yourselves, are expectations clear all across the board? Are expectations clear with from the ground up for every role? Do they know what they are expected to deliver? Do they know what they are how they are expected to behave? So are expectations clear? Are conversations practiced? Even tough conversations. Are people open to having honest conversations, difficult conversations where feedback is both accepted and given with genuine care, right? So are conversations practiced? Are concerns escalated safely? Do people feel comfortable sharing concerns about processes or things that they may have encountered, or scenarios or situations that may be put into question certain values or certain behaviors? Is there in some way some psychological safety within the organization? And do we exercise consequences to bad behavior consistently, or even to good behavior? Are they acknowledged? Are they recognized? Are we consistent in terms of how we reward or punish behavior, good or bad behavior? And are we consistent with that? Because oftentimes this is where a lot of the issues across employees, this is where it happens, because people compare, right? People talk about what happened to themselves versus what happened to others. And so if we say one thing, let's say we say, oh, we promote people based on meritocracy, and yet people see that someone else is promoted because they were playing favorites, then there now is a problem within your structure, within your process, within your organization. And that's what we mean by structural integrity within your organization. Ask these questions, right? So when we talk about behavior, better behavior, when you want people to have better behavior, it becomes easier when your own structures, when your own systems support it. Not because people, are threatened or are forced to behave, but because your structure allows them to do the right thing. It allows them to perform in the right way. It allows them to behave in a clearer, safer, and more consistent manner. So your good intentions need to go across the entire spectrum, right? From good intentions to your own to consistent behavior. It has to show all throughout, right? In your entire organization. Now, when we talk about structures as well, that I'd like to talk about the 4 structures that make emotional intelligence truly stick. There are four main things. There are a lot of others, but I believe that these 4 structures, or these 4 pillars, truly help emotional intelligence stick to people, how they behave or demonstrate emotional intelligence. Number 1, there has to be role clarity. They need to know what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be delivering, what they're supposed to be delivering on, and what decision rights they have. When we talk about decision rights, we're talking about the limits to which they can make certain decisions. At every level, there are certain limits to decisions, right? So they need to be clear about those. At what point do they then let someone else make the decision? When do they escalate the path? So that's the other structure. So there's escalation pathways. The other structure is feedback discipline. When we talk about feedback discipline, it's not just, very random, very casual, let's just, people have feedback. But when we talk about feedback discipline, we are actually talking about something that is consistent, something that is structured in some way. It doesn't have to be very complex or complicated. I actually would like to share a tool with you in a little while about about giving feedback. But when we talk about feedback discipline, do people actually exercise this regularly, practice this regularly? Whenever in a lot of organizations that I've worked with, they say, oh, we have an open door policy, or, oh yes, we welcome feedback. But there is no real structure or cadence to that feedback. There is no discipline, and there is no, I would say, a flow to how they provide feedback. And so without feedback discipline, any correction or any encouragement you may give may just lose its impact, because then they don't really know what it is that you are trying to tell them. And so feedback discipline is a very important structure for you to have in your organization. The last structure here is consequence consistency. I think, I've been mentioning this all throughout. Consequence consistency is you upholding integrity, right? When people behave in acceptable ways, are they rewarded? Are they acknowledged? If the behavior that is expected of them is demonstrated. If they deviate from those behaviors, what happens? Are the consequences clear? Are the consequences applied to all in the same manner, regardless of your level, your role within the organization? Do leaders also, share the same consequences as their direct reports, as the staff? So we need to be very clear about these things, because then if you have all four structures, all four pillars, when you have role clarity, feedback discipline, escalation pathways, and consequence consistency, then you are allowing your organization's members, your employees, to actually engage in healthy relationships, in healthy encounters or communication, and you allow them to exercise emotional intelligence in a manner that allows them to grow, to develop. A lot of people think emotional intelligence just is in the gut. Emotional intelligence actually has a biological, I would say a biological root. Okay. So just to make a quick, I'd say a detour for a bit. We all receive information into our brains through our spine. It gets into the brain, right? So once information enters our brain, it goes directly to our limbic system. And the limbic system, if you've all watched Inside Out, that Disney movie, that's where all the emotions live, right? And every information that enters your brain, there will be an attached emotion to it, because that's the first stop. Now, even if that emotion is indifference, it is still an emotion. And that information then passes through to your frontal lobe, where you now process that logically and rationally. Emotional intelligence happens almost simultaneously between these two parts of your brain. You need to be able to have that awareness of your emotion so that you know how to respond properly. Okay. So that's why we say it's personal. Now, when you work within a system, when you work within an organization, if your role is not clear, you are confused about what you are supposed to be doing or what you're supposed to be delivering, it adds stress. It heightens your emotion. If feedback is not given, or if there is no structure to the feedback that is given to you, you also go through another source of stress, right? And so again, your emotions are heightened. If you do not know how to escalate, whom to escalate to, and you're left to deal with everything, another layer of stress. And if you feel that you are wronged, despite the fact that you are trying to behave or perform in a way that your organization expects from you, because then, you know, you're not being rewarded for it, or you're seeing someone else rewarded for something that they should not be doing, then it adds more stress. And so all these 4 pillars, if they are not present in your organization, it makes it difficult for me, no matter how high performing I am, to exercise emotional intelligence. Okay? So let's very quickly go through each, as I mentioned earlier. Role clarity: people communicate better when they know what they own, what others own, who decides what standards apply, and where boundaries are. Okay? They are able to communicate better when they know all these things. It's clear in their heads, because without clarity, people just tend to work through tension and stress, and they learn to manage that, right? And it becomes a frustrating point for them. Okay. When we talk about work discipline or feedback discipline, feedback should not depend on courage alone. Okay? When I say feedback should not depend on courage alone, it generally means you don't have to feel afraid and just bite the bullet just to give feedback so that you can course correct, right? Feedback needs to have shared language across the entire organization. It needs regularity, a cadence where feedback happens, where they can expect it to be, to be done in a regular manner. It needs specific behavior focus. You don't give feedback to attack a person. You give feedback to address certain behaviors. And so there are specific behavior focus. You need to make sure that when you provide feedback, you provide clear next steps. And finally, you need to make sure that when you provide feedback, there's also manager practice. What does that mean? Your manager also is able to practice or receive feedback themselves, right? It becomes they model the behavior, because feedback is it makes a person feel safer to give feedback when they see that it's an acceptable practice within the organization, when they feel that, oh, feedback is something that we regularly give to each other, right? And so you see here in the cycle, you observe certain behaviors, you label that behavior, you discuss that behavior, you come to an agreement about the next steps, and then you follow through. And that's part of manager practice. Okay? So I'd like to share a simple tool when it comes to feedback structure, and it's called CBIN. So CBIN, it stands for context, behavior, impact, and next steps. So when you provide feedback, it's very, very simple. CBIN. You observed the behavior. Where and when did it happen? What was the context? Right? When did you observe it? What did you observe? What behavior did you observe? Now, when we talk about behavior, it's not attitude. It's very different from attitude. Behavior is action that you took, right? And oftentimes it's a pattern that you see. For example, someone who is regularly absent on a Monday, that's a behavior. Absence is that absenteeism is behavior. because behavior can be observed. It can be, there's evidence for it, right? Like in your timesheets and all that, there's a record, and you may see a pattern, so it is repeatable, and it can be corrected. So that's behavior. So what was observed? What was that behavior observed? And then how did it affect the team? How did it impact the organization, the client, or even your own performance? So what was the effect? How did it impact that person? And so now what needs to happen? How do we course correct? How do we fix this? So in your conversation, that can be your structure. So for example, if I were to just give a very simple example, I can say, John, in the meeting earlier, I noticed that you did not speak up all throughout the entire meeting. And I've been observing this for the past 3 weeks now. In every meeting that you attend, you don't speak up. So where and when did it happen, and what behavior was observed? Now this has caused a lot of back and forth between the team or among the team members, because they are waiting for you to provide them with additional feedback or information, and it's not coming from you. So we are waiting on you to actually give clarity to certain issues. So what I would like for us to do is for you to deliver a report or speak up or ask your questions during the next stand-up meeting. So if you take a look at that entire structure of giving feedback, it's very simple. You provided the context, you identified the behavior, you shared how it was affecting either the team or themselves or the organization, and provided a clear next step. So this is a very simple feedback structure that I would like to share with you as part of that structure within the organization, okay, or that pillar within the organization. So the third pillar that I mentioned earlier was escalation pathways. So just to be clearer about it, when we talk about escalation pathways, people need to know what it is, at what point do they escalate, right? When to escalate, what should be escalated, and when do they need to escalate? Whom do they approach for that escalation? And what is the process for escalating? Are there steps that they need to follow? And if they do escalate, do they have any protection? Are there protections that exist, or will it bite them in the back, right? So these things need to be addressed. They need to know these so that it's easier, or it feels safer for them to actually escalate issues. Because if people do not know how to escalate, then silence becomes your system, and you are more likely to not have real growth or real change or real progress. Okay? So this is part of their decision rights that I mentioned earlier. Okay. Now, the last pillar I mentioned was consequence consistency. Now, your culture, your organizational culture weakens when consequences depend on these things: seniority, personal closeness, purely on performance, high performance, tenure, and convenience, right? When consequences depend on these, then it signals that your culture is not actually, let's say, very inclusive or very safe. Because integrity is, you will see integrity in your organizations when your systems consistently allows behavior or corrects behavior or rewards behavior and protects behavior. Good or bad behavior, the same response is consistent. So you hold the different behaviors to the same standard, regardless of whether they are different cases or, they're similar or different cases. You hold behaviors to the same standard. So that's what we mean by consequence consistency. Now, let me give you a simple case, right? A manager, for example, wants to give honest feedback, but let's say performance standards are vague, the employee reports indirectly to another leader, and you've ignored past issues that were raised. You don't have clear HR documentation of previous incidences, and your manager fears that, fears being seen as too harsh or too unfriendly. Question: do you feel or do you think this is just an EI issue? Feel free to put it in the chat, or if you would like to just use your microphone, that's fine too. But what do you think? Is this only an EI issue? If a manager wants to give feedback, but these are the things that is stopping them. Right. It's a system issue. It's not just an emotional intelligence issue, right? What are the systems that you're seeing here? Performance standards, documentation, role clarity, and organizational structure. Okay. So these things become challenging, okay, for the employee to give feedback. So how should HR look at emotional intelligence within their organization? HR needs to make a strategic shift. You need to shift from just being a training provider or policy custodian or issue responder to becoming behavior architects, to becoming leadership systems partners, and to becoming integrity builders. What do we mean by that? You are in a very good position to influence your organization, your leadership, to defining behaviors that you want your employees to demonstrate. And it's not just through training, it's through everyday action, right? And through the policies, through the guidelines, through the consequences of behaviors that you allow. So you need to make that shift. HR often limits itself to, we're just, we just provide training. We just, follow protocol or, uphold policy and the labor code. We just, manage employee discipline and, just manage or respond to certain issues. You need to make that shift. You need just to go beyond that and move towards how can we help the organization? How do we help design our organization so that behavior is easier, better behavior is easier to practice? How do we help leaders, remain consistent, have leadership integrity or structural integrity in terms of practicing expected behaviors themselves, right? How can we ensure that our organization is structurally sound? Okay? So what are the questions that you can ask? System questions that you can ask are very simple. Look at the things that are, in your organization right now and ask yourselves, what expectations are unclear here? Which part of our organizations do we experience unclear expectations? Do we have situations where people avoid having conversations or having tough conversations? And where does pressure create shortcuts, right? Do people take shortcuts when going through certain processes, even if there is a documented process in place? So where does that happen in that process, right? Where are consequences inconsistent? When have we applied, you know, consequences that were not aligned to our employee handbook or to the disciplinary code? When have we applied, when have we promoted someone who did not really deserve to be promoted? So where do leaders rely on personality instead of process? When does this happen? Where do we see these scenarios happening? Where does silence protect the wrong behavior? When does it happen? Does our organization allow our employees to speak up or to just remain silent? So these are system questions that you can ask even now. So I'd like you to make use of, you don't need to do this now, you don't need to let us know, but I'd like you to think about this. I'd like you to think about your organization right now and do a better behavior check. And use these 5 criteria and see, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, for roles and decisions are clear, where is my organization right now? For feedback happens regularly and specifically, how would I rate my organization? Do people know how to escalate concerns? On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, where is my organization at? Are consequences fair and consistent within my organization? The system supports the behaviors we expect. Where are we there? Scale of 1 to 5. Use these 5 criteria to just do a quick better behavior check for your own organizations. And based on your own ratings, then you can focus on what you need to address first. So start small, but start structurally. Use the better behavior check and then choose one behavior, just one behavior. You don't need to overhaul the entire structure or the entire organization, but you choose one that is maybe your most painful point. Choose one behavior, identify that one system gap, and then you strengthen that one structure. So if you take a look here, I have a few examples. For example, clarify one recurring decision point. Okay? Even in your small group, in your small team, what is that one decision point that keeps coming back to you that people keep asking you about? Why do people keep asking about this? What is the gap here? Where are we seeing, the system gap? And then how do we strengthen it? So it's just very simple. Just choose one behavior, one system gap, and then one structure. So the other examples, you can take a look. Let's say adding a monthly feedback rhythm. For other people, it's having regular coaching cadence, maybe a weekly coaching cadence for managers and supervisors. Maybe defining escalation triggers. Maybe escalation pathways are not clear within your organization and, or they end up in the wrong place all the time. So where is that? Where's the pain point here? And what gap are you seeing? Or maybe you need to align leaders on consequence standards. Maybe not all leaders follow the same standards or the same process. So just choose one. You don't need to overhaul everything. You don't need to complicate things. to help people exercise emotional intelligence better, right? So essentially, what I'm trying to say here is that emotional intelligence, while personal, it does matter. We all are expected to exercise emotional intelligence personally. We're all expected to manage and regulate our own response to triggers. How we respond becomes the evidence of our high or low emotional intelligence. But better behavior becomes sustainable when the workplace we are in or the structure we are in make clarity, courage, accountability, and integrity easier to practice. So for us in HR, we need to help our organizations build the system that supports the right behavior. So I would like to open the floor to your questions.
Hi, Sunny. Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I'm trying to read if there are messages in chat, but there are some questions in our Viber group that I would like to read.
Sure.
Yeah, you stopped with creating a better system, but
Mhm.
now that the work environment has really changed with more hybrid and remote
Ah,
worker experience, which of the structure or how do organizations move forward? Because it's more challenging now with people. Some of them are in the office, some are working remotely.
right. So we're looking at hybrid. How do we apply this to remote or hybrid teams?
Yes, that's right.
Right. Okay. So remote and hybrid work makes structural clarity even more important, right? So when people are not physically together, they rely more heavily on explicit agreements. So, for example, certain useful structures would include, let's say, clear response time rules or norms. They need to have decision logs, for example, or meeting agreements. You need to make sure that at the end of every meeting there is a clear agreement. They need to have clearer escalation rules because they're not there, right? They're not physically there to go to the next person. So they need to know clearly how to escalate. And they need to be able to um, have regular one-on-ones with their own immediate supervisors. There has to be like a rhythm to giving feedback. And they need to have clearer handoff protocols. So, it's easier for them to document ownership. So,
Mhm,
because in remote work,
mhm,
silence can look like autonomy, right? Until it becomes misalignment. So, the system needs to make communication and accountability visible to hybrid or, you know, um, home, remote workers.
mhm. Yeah. Okay, I'm sure that after this webinar, our participants here are very excited to implement this right away, whatever learnings they have picked up from you. So if they could implement just one action from today, from today's webinar, when they go back and they think of how can I apply this, what do you think is the first thing that they should do?
Okay. When I think of one practical thing that we can do after this webinar, I would I would just stick to choose one recurring behavior issue that you are experiencing at the moment and then run a simple structural integrity check. Just that. Choose one recurring behavior issue that you're experiencing, the pain point that you have, and then run that structural integrity check. Ask yourselves, is the expected behavior clear? Do people know who owns what? Is feedback happening early enough? Is there a safe escalation path? And are consequences consistent? Just, with that one recurring behavior issue. And then when you've answered all of that, choose one small action. You do not need to start with an entire culture campaign. Just start with one behavior, the pain point that you have at the moment, then one gap, and then one structural fix. That's really all the most practical thing you can do.
Okay. Let me check if there are other questions. I like what you shared about behavior because it's easy for us to judge, interpret,
Yes.
whatever behavior we see. Then we saw that this person is always out, always. Why is this person always on break? Then we already judge
Yes.
behavior, and so instead of capturing that behavior, we use now our personal interpretation of the
Yes.
behavior. Yeah.
That's
Okay,
true.
let me check.
Well,
Yeah. Okay, so here, suppose a team has emotionally intelligent employees, but roles and decision-making authority are unclear. Where should leaders start to improve collaboration?
so let me just clarify the question.
So, yeah,
Are you the leader?
so it says that suppose a team has
Mhm.
already emotionally intelligent employees, but roles
Okay.
and decision-making authority are not clear.
Uh,
So, where should leaders start in order to improve collaboration? I'm actually saying it's not so
oh,
clear to me also what it
okay. I
means.
think I can simplify the question
Mm,
here. How do we get leaders to buy into this whole
maybe.
EI?
Mm,
And helping, like build that structure where EI is actually easier to exercise, right? Then I would say if you want to convince your leaders to buy into this, connect it to business pain.
mhm,
Leaders, they don't immediately respond to the language of structural integrity, but they will understand delayed decisions or repeated conflict or too much rework or high attrition or your employees don't really trust you, very low trust, or they're frustrated because of poor execution, or you know, there's employee relations risks, right? Like ESAT and all that. So instead of saying, "Oh, we need to improve our culture," and I will address this to HR, right? For the most part, we
mhm.
can't just tell leaders, "Oh, we need to improve our culture." That's not gonna work.
Yeah,
What you
yeah.
can actually say is, this behavior pattern is creating execution risk. So we
Mhm,
need clearer expectations, we need better feedback cadence, and we need more consistent leadership response.
mhm,
So by putting it in that, in that way, it
mhm,
makes your conversation more concrete
mhm.
instead of just general, okay,
Yeah.
you need to model our better culture, right? That's
Kasi
not
dapat
an
more
easy.
specific, yes.
Yes, you need to
Okay,
frame it in a
yeah.
way that they understand.
Yes, yes. I have one more question here.
Sure.
Maybe this question is is related to an experience that you have because it says, have you encountered organizations where improving role clarity or feedback systems significantly change the workplace culture? So improving role
Yeah.
clarity or feedback systems change the workplace culture. And what helped made these changes successful?
Okay. Um, right. So I have this. So I did consulting for a construction firm, a construction company, uh, prior to the whole DPWH thing. So the main challenge for them was, um, because in construction, right, you have a lot of casual workers, casual employees, and there were safety issues, there were behavioral issues, and when we looked into their entire system, when I went in and reviewed, it turns out that there were so many things that were missing. they did not have clear they did not have a clear employee handbook or a code of conduct. They also did not have any real onboarding process. So when we went in, and we started with those two things, right? We started with those two things. We sat down with everyone at every level, right?
Mm.
And just really went through the entire process of defining what needs to go into the employee handbook and what needs to be included in the code of conduct, and how, what are the consequences for those behaviors, right? And so when we identified those, we went through the entire process of, sharing, educating everybody. And we included the casuals in the entire process, right?
Oh.
And then also as well, we went through the whole onboarding. How do you onboard? It's not a very big, complicated thing, but just introduce them to the organization and share with them what the expectations are, and what the important rules are in the handbook, in the code of conduct, that that seems to be a persistent thing in their industry. And so by just implementing those two things, just ensuring that the handbook is rolled out, we even translated it into Filipino with like a comics, so that it's easier for them to understand. And then and then made sure that the consequences were applied, all consistently. The organization saw, initially it stabilized in terms of its attrition, especially for the casuals.
Because you involved the casuals.
Yes.
So you
So
were
even
able
the
to
casuals, even the ones in the job sites. So because they also experienced an onboarding process, they also felt like, oh, we're really part of an organization. And so they experienced lower attrition. It initially stabilized, and then now even if they're casuals, once a project is done, they feel secure that if there's a new project, they can be moved to the next project. So they don't really want to leave that organization anymore, even if they're not regular employees yet. So there was that change. And there was also a change in the management itself, the way the management team dealt with the employee concerns, because before they just handed it off to whoever was in HR, or whoever was the supervisor or the foreman, right? But because we went through an entire conversation about the impact of the behaviors on their bottom line, right? They were now more involved in terms of coming up with a people strategy for their organization. So yeah, so just small things. It's still a work in progress for this organization, but it was, I think they're moving in the right direction. And the behaviors they were seeing, they realized it was actually a lot of the behaviors were condoned systemically, right? So that was
Was
addressed.
it like was it like a task force or a team that was formed? Because normally it's just HR, but if there are issues
Yes,
or
usually it's HR,
so did
but
they
they
form a
involve
separate team?
people from the different, like they involve the engineers, they involve the supervisors, and the ones who are assigned to the jobs on site. It was a challenge actually, scheduling, because they work 24/7, right? So but we got it done. They also then created a new role, particularly for what's this for, I think it was the role was more for information, like security. Yeah.
Yeah, but
data security.
what was your approach top down? Did you start from the top down or a team first and then hanggang
So
taas
the
approval?
yeah, so the initial the project actually landed in my lap because of their the chief commercial officer. He
Mm,
was getting frustrated because they couldn't secure like the clients like because of people problems.
yeah.
And so it started at the top. I interviewed
Yeah.
the executive team first. We went through the whole process first, and then they did not get involved in the okay, this is what we need to do, because what we did was okay. Just try to understand what the problem was from the executive team, and then we went down slowly as we at every level, at every layer we went through the whole process and got through the whole interviews with
Mm-mm.
everyone.
So you were able to diagnose the root cause of the problem. All
Yes,
right.
it was
Okay.
interesting. It was
Yeah.
it's because construction is a very
Mm,
interesting, very challenging industry.
Yep. I have more questions, but I will just send it to you by email because we might end
Okay,
at 6 p.m. if I read all the questions. But for now,
sure.
we would like to thank you, Sunny, and I would like to also thank everyone that participated, that joined, and everyone that has joined our previous webinars. Thank you very much to all of you. And we hope that today's session has given you valuable insights into how workplace systems alongside emotional intelligence can help foster better accountability, trust, and positive workplace behavior. And this is just part of our commitment to give you 20 webinars. Ewan ko nga kung nakailan na kami, but for those who have been attending, congratulations. And there are more. I hope that you will join us also in our future webinars. But before we end, we appreciate if you could stay just a few more minutes for our evaluation survey. That also helps us determine what sort of webinar to offer next. So please give us feedback. Tell us what it is that you are interested in learning. There it is, the short evaluation poll. Please answer it. And after the survey, we will have another group photo.
Thank you, Sunny. That was really good. Lots
Yeah.
of questions also, and we'll just send,
Let's see, and tayo matapos if I read all.
yeah, send over the responses.
So those who ask questions, who sent their questions, just wait for the
Yeah,
answering.
we'll share them with Sunny.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest
Bye.
of the day.
Thank you. Thank you.